Michael Jordan, one of the greatest competitive minds in American sports, ignited the court for millions of dreams. From a near-anonymous boy in Wilmington, he rose to become the most commanding face of modern basketball. With an almost mystical intuition for reading the game's rhythm and seizing the moment, he turned leaps into icons and games into collective memories, earning the title of the golden-eyed master of decisive moments. For over 2 decades, he defined what dominance on the court meant. 6 NBA championships, 1991, 1993, 1996, 1998, 5 MVP awards, 6 consecutive Finals MVPs, 10 scoring titles, 9 All-Defensive First-Team selections, Defensive Player of the Year in 1988, Rookie of the Year in 1985, 14 All-Star appearances, and 2 Olympic gold medals, 1984, 1992. In the 1995-96 season, his Chicago Bulls set a 72-10 record. At Boston Garden, he scored 63 points through pain, forcing a legendary city to bow in awe. In the feverish exhaustion of 1997, he still dropped 38 points to shift fate. The double-nickel 55 points at Madison Square Garden after his comeback was a declaration to all of America. Michael Jordan, the mind and heart behind unprecedented seasons, game-winning shots that left arenas breathless, and cultural campaigns like Be Like Mike, the movie Space Jam that etched him into a generation's childhood, and later The Last Dance that brought 1990s America back to life during a pandemic. But behind that legacy lies not only glory but a silent battlefield of pain, fractured health, prolonged loneliness, and tragedies that fame could not shield. The world celebrated that dominance for years, but few were ready to face the truth that haunted him. Empty nights when the applause faded, mornings when his body felt like wood, and memories of a father who never got to speak his pride. Behind the thunder of fame lies a brutal truth. Michael's early stage was not bathed in spotlights, but born from the silence of discipline and doubt. In high school, he wasn't always the obvious choice. In college, one shot put him on the map, but also placed a burden on his shoulders to always be the hero. And amid the storm of glory, tragedy struck like a blade to America's heart. In the summer of 1993, his father was taken, leaving a void no championship could fill. The spotlight fueled hope for millions, but also trapped him in the cage of his own legend, to be stronger than pain, to smile through nights stitching up cracks no camera could see. At 62, he tells that story more quietly, less bravado, more inward reflection. He recalls a boy born in Brooklyn, then raised amid the salty afternoon breezes of Wilmington, North Carolina, where the backyard's old basketball hoop clattered like the heartbeat of long days. Michael Jordan didn't step into childhood as a finished genius. He entered it through absence, lacking praise, lacking assurance that he was enough, lacking a roadmap beyond his father's sternness and his mother's gentle but unyielding discipline. In a home where the sound of basketball games on the TV mixed with the smell of damp wood, his father, James, taught his son how to grip a doorknob tightly before stepping into the world. Either you make them see you, or you vanish into the crowd. At Emsley A. Laney High School, Michael wasn't a legend from the opening page. He was a footnote in the middle, a quick-witted student, sometimes hot-tempered, dribbling as if escaping an invisible shadow always lurking behind him. A later myth, inflated by the press, claimed he was cut from the team as a defining humiliation. The truth was more complex. In his early high school years, he played on the junior varsity squad, watching upperclassmen in varsity jerseys and wondering when his turn would come. That feeling of being on the sidelines, not a verdict, but a reminder if you want your name called, create a moment they can't forget. His older brother Larry was his first rival, and also a mirror reflecting his imperfections. One-on-one games under the backyard floodlight, stretched until mosquitoes swarmed their ankles, hands scratched and bleeding, yet still clinging to the ball. Larry was shorter, faster, tougher. Winning or losing mattered less than how they sweated, as if betting their identities. Michael grew up in the tight confines of family competition, and from it a different hunger was born. A hunger to be seen, not just by future crowds, but first by the brother who taught him never to surrender. His mother, Dolores, quietly added another kind of discipline, humility and duty, lessons about responsibility before talk of hoops. She said, "You can fly, but first learn to land without hurting anyone." So Michael learned to wake early, lace his sneakers carefully, and count every shot into the hoop like a debt to himself. His junior varsity years were a notebook thick with tallies, 50 free throws, 200 mid-range shots, 100 left-handed layups, everything numbered, because the boy needed proof to silence the inner voice whispering he wasn't good enough. Loneliness took shape not from a lack of friends, but from an internal rhythm faster than everyone else's. When games ended and others left the court, the boy stayed 15 minutes longer, practicing a fadeaway he'd seen on TV, the squeak of his sneakers on concrete like a private oath. Then came the day the door opened. His body grew taller, arms longer, the ball feeling like an extension of his flesh, and the varsity coach called his name. But being seen didn't erase loneliness, it only reshaped it. Now every glance carried a measure, every shot faced an invisible jury waiting to judge. There, Michael discovered a defense mechanism for someone on the cusp of legend, talking to himself, self-taunting, conjuring imagined insults to fuel the fire, underlining others' doubts and turning them into soul-strengthening drills. Friends saw a boy laughing after a dunk, teachers saw a polite but fiercely competitive student. Only the night knew he came home with burning knees, soaking them in a metal bucket of ice water, staring at the ceiling, and calculating how many more shots he needed to hear the word proud echo in his mind. When college scouting letters began piling up, the boy Jordan knew he'd broken free from the page's margins, but he also knew in that moment that the shadow of loneliness wouldn't leave. Because being seen meant being demanded, and being demanded meant long nights alone in front of a mirror, practicing footwork, breathing, even the look in his eyes. UNC didn't come as a random gift. It arrived as the result of a silent pact he'd made with himself in Wilmington's backyard. If the world won't look, I'll make it unable to turn away. From that moment, loneliness stopped being an abyss and became a tool, an invisible gym where Jordan forged his inner voice into a war drum. And because he'd spent years on the fringes, he learned to step onto center stage without trembling, even when his heart pounded like it might burst. At the end of youth, people tend to have two kinds of memories, those of joy and those of confronting fear. Michael Jordan kept more of the latter, and the paradox is that they prepared him for later nights, when all of America awaited the impossible. Before becoming an icon, he was a boy training to be remembered. Before flying, he was a boy learning to count down doubts. And before stepping into the NBA's blazing nights, he'd lived long enough in Wilmington's cold sunsets to understand being seen is never free. Its price is a restless inner life that never sleeps. That autumn, the Wilmington boy stepped into Chapel Hill like someone who had just unlocked a secret door. The University of North Carolina wasn't just a school, it was an ecosystem of discipline, a cathedral of details. Dean Smith didn't shout, he whispered reminders. Offering no shortcuts, he handed out maps. In those early practices, Michael learned to move without the ball, to defend like a living geometry, sealing angles, blocking paths, steering opponents where he wanted them. At UNC, where every error had a name and every strength came at the cost of habit, he realized talent couldn't walk alone. He woke early, tracing arcing then straight-line sprints, learning to read open spaces like deciphering a complex sentence, and accepting being pulled to the bench to learn the art of waiting. Discipline didn't kill spontaneity, it gave spontaneity a frame to keep it from collapsing. Then March 1982 arrived, like a fated appointment. The NCAA championship, UNC versus Georgetown, with the entire nation holding its breath before a puzzle named Patrick Ewing. Michael, at that moment, wasn't yet MJ, just a freshman, needing to prove he wouldn't flinch. The final play flowed through teammates' hands and found him in the wing's corner. Time didn't stop, it contracted. A small hop, a release. The shot didn't just drop through the net, it lodged in collective memory, a moment that unlocked destiny. But for Michael himself, that shot was a baptism for fear from then on. Every endgame moment carried the knowledge that he'd survived the highest pressure. From that point, loneliness shifted roles. It became the silent companion of every major decision. Over the next 2 seasons, UNC honed him into a razor's edge. Dean Smith's gospel, move right, minimize mistakes, be timely, seeped into his bones. Some nights, Michael scored sparingly, but caught a defensive rhythm that tilted entire games. Some practices, the coach fixated on a single detail of foot placement, repeating until his ankles burned. When tournaments called, Michael understood that being seen was no longer the issue. The question was how he'd be seen. In 1984, the Chicago Bulls picked him 3rd overall. The NBA stage was brighter, bigger, demanding more than skill. It required nerve. In his rookie season, Michael entered the court like a warning to the league: explosive speed, rhythmic leaps, an ability to read moments. The Rookie of the Year award wasn't a gift. It was proof that every junior varsity notebook and every Wilmington dawn had fused into the precise release of his wrist. Then came the first crack, not on the scoreboard, but in his bones. Early in the 1985-86 season, a mistimed landing fractured the navicular bone in his foot. The would-be king of uninterrupted rain was forced to watch the clock. The training room became a new border between desire and caution. Doctors measured recovery in millimeters. Management weighed risks, and Michael, used to living by his inner tempo, gritted his teeth to learn slowness. He discovered a new kind of pain, silent pain. No roar of the crowd, just the hum of machines, the snap of resistance bands, sweat dripping onto the floor like punctuation for a paused sentence. For someone who'd soared over the world, learning to stand still was the harshest lesson. When he returned late that season, Chicago strapped a ticking hourglass to his back, strict minute restrictions, a few precious moments per quarter like a leash on his heart. Intense games, coaches pulled him when the clock still had ticks left, and there Michael tasted the athlete's deepest dread, strength left unused, forced to stop. The stoicism of UNC and Wilmington's self-punishing rhythm kept him from rebelling. He channeled anger into his knees, his breath. Every minute on the court became gold, and he spent each grain with the urgency of someone who knew one misstep could cost everything. Then the 1986 playoffs erupted, and Boston Garden, the Green Cathedral, opened its gates like a trial. Facing legends, Michael entered as if collecting a debt from fate itself. In Game 2, he touched 63 points, but what haunted wasn't the number, it was the rhythm of pain and exhilaration intertwined. Each landing sent a warning through his old fracture. Each leap burned his lungs like salt. Yet the ball kept falling through the hoop, quarter after quarter, into overtime. When Boston's fans exchanged glances, they didn't just see a scorer, they saw a will refusing to lose to a body that had betrayed it. That night, Michael didn't win the series, the Bulls lost, but he won a piece of his own definition, that the light of his early days wasn't a birthright, but the result of deliberate surrender to discipline and measured defiance of pain. After the game, in a small room behind the Garden, with bandages undone and his foot swollen, Michael sat listening to the hallway's noise fade. Some praised, some compared, some exaggerated. But in his mind, another sound rang, the steady tap of junior varsity days, 50 free throws, 200 mid-range shots, 100 left-handed layups. Every light, it turned out, began with a familiar beat. He thought of Dean Smith, how he'd nod slightly and say something not of praise but of caution. Good, but don't let the moment blind you. In that instant, Michael understood that the first crack didn't just hurt, it opened a slit of light to see his true structure, a man who always needed a slope to climb. The next season, as his body healed, the Bulls began to realize they held not just a star, but a self-generating force of pressure. Michael entered each game like he was honoring a promise signed with the Wilmington boy, make the world unable to look away. But he also knew bones have memory, and the margin between glory and powerlessness was as thin as a sneaker's edge. That first crack taught him to treasure every 3-minute burst, no wasted breath, no vague habits, mornings checking the ball 15 minutes before others, evenings soaking his feet and talking to himself for 15 more. He gathered the shards of injury to build a new kind of resolve. The light of his early days, then, was no longer a reckless blaze. It was the light of a man who'd sat counting the cracks in his own bones, and decided they wouldn't define his future. From Chapel Hill to Chicago, from the shot to 63 points in Boston, Michael Jordan's early journey wasn't a straight line. It was a graph of hope challenged by limits and returning stronger. If the second chapter of his life gave the Wilmington boy a hunger to be seen, this third taught the Chapel Hill youth a bone-deep lesson. Being seen is a moment, but becoming unforgettable is a lifetime of befriending discipline, pain, and the hourglasses that force you to choose what matters in each fleeting grip of the ball. Chicago's summer carried the thick scent of hot asphalt, and the United Center, still Chicago Stadium, before the move thrummed like a leather drum. Michael stepped into the phase every athlete dreams of, but few understand, the era of kingship. Phil Jackson gave him, and the team, a shared language, the triangle offense, a living geometry linking Michael's instincts to the breath of his teammates. Scottie Pippen stretched the defense like a shadow. Horace Grant built a muscular wall in the paint. John Paxson moved quietly like a second hand, but always struck with the clean swish of a three-pointer. The discipline of Dean Smith, the hunger of Wilmington, the precision of Chicago, all converged into a structure that exhausted opponents, not with tricks, but by leaving them no room to breathe. In 1991, the NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers marked a cultural changing of the guard. Game 1 was a loss, and Chicago jolted awake. The throne was never preset. But in Game 2, Michael unleashed the switch hands layup, gliding past two big men like a poem shifting rhyme at its final word. All of America gasped and realized a new reel was overwriting the old tapes. The series closed with Michael's tear-streaked smile as he clutched the trophy, tears soaking into his jersey for his father, still alive, still waiting, though history was already drafting eulogies for other losses. The throne, from its first moment, cast its own shadow. In 1991-92, the crown didn't weigh on Michael's head, it pressed on his chest. He learned to breathe under pressure like a diver, sparing movements, choosing strikes, staying on beat. The Portland Trail Blazers met them in the finals with Clyde Drexler as a mirror, tall, smooth, esteemed. In Game 1, three-pointers fell in a cascade until Michael dropped his shoulders and shrugged. The shrug, a gesture both innocent and brutal, from someone in a flow state where basketball became a game of force and instinct. But that moment also signed a new contract from now on. Every gesture would be dissected, every stumble magnified, every offbeat moment proof that the king could tire. On the night of the second title, Chicago's cheers mixed with a faint sigh. Defending a throne wasn't like seizing it, it demanded living with knives aimed at your back. 1992-93 was a season of looming shadows. Off the court, Be Like Mike turned Jordan into an icon for an America craving simplicity. Drink Gatorade, wear airs, run, fly, win. Within, Michael paid with heavy-kneed mornings and evenings, stretched into mental war councils. The grueling schedule, close-up camera lights, and repetitive questions hammered. How do you not lose to yourself after conquering the world? The Phoenix Suns, led by Charles Barkley, entered the finals as Chicago's vibrant counterpoint, strong, charismatic, relentless. The series stretched, shifting America's pulse. In moments, Michael wasn't human. He was a function, targeting Barkley's half-beat slow hip turn, attacking a shorter defender's left arm, luring the defense into a trap before passing to the corner. And when Game 6's final seconds exploded with John Paxson's three-pointer, a law of empire became clear. The king didn't need to land the killing blow. He needed to build an order where the quietest could deliver it. The three-peat was complete, Chicago's throats hoarse, and Michael sat alone long after in the locker room, fingers brushing the trophy like touching a surface both cool and sharp. But the shadow of kingship had grown as vast as the ceiling. An empire doesn't just breed challengers, it nurtures whispers. From airports to hotels, gyms to press rooms, Michael heard a new rhythm of questions, not from reporters, but from within. Is there more? And at what cost? Even on the championship parade bus with teammates, he carried a different silence, that of someone who knew every season could be the last with his father in the stands, thumb raised. A crown, worn too long, becomes an indentation, and that mark makes every cheer feel like it lasts only an afternoon. Phil Jackson, the baseball cap-wearing Zen master, sensed that darkness. He opened team meetings with riddles, books, images of Native American drums, urging Jordan and the squad to see beyond the scoreboard. But basketball, ultimately, is a job that forces you to land every 24 seconds. Scottie Pippen grew into a deputy conductor, Horace Grant toiled like a bulldozer, Bill Cartwright, aged but resolute, held firm. They were the empire's sinews, but Michael was the beating heart, demanding the blood flow faster. Here, the shadow of kingship took form. To keep it all running, Jordan had to become harsher, less forgiving, even ruthless with those he loved most, his teammates. Every practice was a courtroom, where he was prosecutor, defendant, and judge of himself. Fans saw the smile in commercials, teammates saw eyes that refused laziness, family saw late nights when he came home, placed ice on his knees, and fell silent. On the surface, 3 golden trophies lined up like dazzling lights. Beneath, existential questions took root. If victory is everything, why does fulfillment touch you only for minutes? If you're the hero, why does loneliness thicken? If the empire is eternal, why does each season feel like an endgame where one wrong move could topple it all? Those questions didn't shake his shooting hand, they just made his heartbeat louder in quiet rooms. The first three-peat, then, wasn't just a saga of triumph, it was a chronicle of a soul stretched between the need to be loved and the need to be right, between craving freedom and the duty to hold the throne. Michael Jordan climbed the peak as a natural outcome of talent and discipline, but standing there, he found the summit wasn't a destination, but a windy, narrow ledge, where a single slip could hurl you back to the abyss. From the gleaming surface of 1991, 1992, 1993, the shadow of kingship stretched, somber but honest, preparing for the greatest crack of his life just weeks after the fireworks faded. And if America learned from those 3 years that an icon could be invincible, Michael began learning a harder lesson: no one is immortal beyond the sidelines. In July 1993, Chicago hadn't yet settled from 3 summers of blazing fireworks when darkness arrived, like a sealed verdict. On a quiet North Carolina road, James Jordan Sr., the man with the baseball cap, gentle smile, and habit of sitting in the stands with a raised thumb, pulled over to rest on a long drive. What followed, Michael could only later name with silence: a robbery, a gunshot, a body abandoned, the luxury car, a gift from his famous son, stolen, and days shrouded in murky information. When the news was confirmed, Michael's voice cracked, his eyes hollow and red, as if he'd just walked out of a smoke-filled room, but that room was his own heart. They said the body was found far from the scene, that identification took days, that police traced the car, names were brought to trial, sentences handed down. But some verdicts aren't for the accused, some hang over the lives of those left behind. For Michael, it was a lifelong sentence of living without that warm voice, the one who stood in the Garden's hallway in 1986, to ask, "You still okay, son?" The one who leaned in when his son held the first trophy in 1991. He lost his father, but he also lost his most ordinary mirror. Condolences poured in like a flood. America, used to seeing Michael as an invincible icon, recoiled before news too human: a robbery, a life taken. The press fell quieter than usual, as if even they understood this was no longer a sports story. In the Wilmington house, old photos grew heavy. In Michael's memory, small details surfaced: afternoons, his father waited by the court, the jangle of keys, the faint smell of gasoline on his shirt, the way the man leaned forward when his son lined up for a crucial free throw, as if trying to touch time without disturbing it. It all became relics in a museum suddenly opened in his heart. Some nights, Michael stood by a window, staring into Chicago's dark yard, imagining the glow of his father's old car headlights from far away. Some mornings he opened a closet, touched his father's old shirt, and hid his hand in it like hiding a breath. At the peak of glory, 3 trophies lined up like small suns, a pitch-black hole gaped in his chest, cold as the second hand's edge. He still trained, posed for photos, signed for endless lines of fans, but from then on, every handshake carried an unasked question: what's left when the man who taught you to be a man no longer sits in the stand's nth row? Phil Jackson spoke to Michael in a language calm and steady as river stones. Scottie Pippen stayed close, the Bulls organization draped a discreet canopy over him. Yet some storms only reign indoors. A new season loomed. Press conferences would again shove microphones in his face. Preseason games would flick on the lights. Jordan looked at the calendar and knew he could keep living as before, but at what cost? One sleepless night tipped the questions to one side. What had he promised himself as the Wilmington boy? If the world won't look, make it look. And now the world was looking, staring even, but the one he most wanted to see was gone. In October 1993, Michael stepped to a podium in a dark suit, gripping the microphone with fingers that once held a ball in deciding seconds, and spoke the words everyone knew were coming, but no one wanted to hear: retirement. The press room held its breath. Questions flew. Beer and water cans on the table grew cold. Michael spoke of fulfillment, of wanting a life his father could be proud of, but between the careful words, a raw truth slipped through like a gust. He needed to leave a place too tied to his father. He needed to learn to breathe again. People thought he'd rest, go fishing, play golf, become a wealthy 30-year-old living slowly, but Michael Jordan was never one to stand still. He chose a path the world called mad: baseball. Not a celebrity's ceremonial first pitch, but a real player starting at the bottom of the ladder. He signed with the Chicago White Sox system, trained on small winter fields, then wore the Birmingham Barons jersey in Double-A. The man who'd made the NBA his stage now sat on hard bus seats, dozing to engine hums, watching highway lights slide past, like commas in a long sentence of life. Each morning, he hit the field early, hands blistered from the bat, palms cracked with salt. The smell of red clay, morning birds, the crisp snap of a ball hitting a glove's pocket, everything raw to its core, no cameras, no jumbotrons, just modest stats. He failed more than he succeeded, swings missed, weak hits, strikeouts piling like typos from someone learning to write. But there, tragedy became a living lesson. Jordan relearned what it was to be ordinary, to practice patience without an audience, to let the crowd's mocking laughter fade into distant static. In small locker rooms, he sat beside young players who hadn't grown up with his posters. They called him Mike, like an older coworker. At rest stops, he queued for snacks, stood under fluorescent lights with no one asking for autographs. And maybe, in those brief moments, Michael reclaimed a piece of life stolen by 1,000 lenses, healthy anonymity. The press, of course, wouldn't leave him be headlines, scrutinized every stat, skeptics sneered he was fleeing pain by switching fields, whispers tied his choice to his father's loss. Michael didn't argue. He woke earlier, clung to practice schedules, to small adjustments, a half-degree tweak to the bat's angle, a tenth of a second faster timing. His coach, later a major league champion, noted Jordan's work ethic-filled notebooks, marked with lines only the writer understood. At night, he texted a few lines to his mother, called his siblings, lit a small candle in a rented room. On the wall, no trophies, just a thin paper schedule. On the table, an old photo, Michael hugging his father, both smiling, hair swaying in the breeze. Each loss prompted a touch of that photo, the only way to keep from breaking. That first farewell, leaving the NBA at its peak, wasn't impulsive. It was a way of living, a way to mourn in the American style of masking grief with work. But this time, the work was chosen to recall nothing. No hoop swish, no air-cushioned sneakers, no scoreboards, just dirt, wind, and a ball's slow curve like a sad answer. America, in its way, reacted with two opposites, skepticism and affection. Some said he was running, others called him brave. Perhaps both were true, fleeing a light that turned every memory of his father into a needle, and brave for daring to enter a room where he knew he wouldn't be the best. Months later, sitting on a stadium step overlooking a haphazardly proud parking lot, Michael realized what years at the top couldn't teach. Some sorrows don't vanish with winds, only soften with steady living, with small things. The brutal blast of that 1993 summer tore the veil between legend and man. The farewell that followed wasn't a chapter closed but another opened. He would return, reclaim the throne, write immortal nights. But daring to leave at the peak was the first stitch mending his heart. Somewhere, in the crunch of tires on a southern summer road, you could hear a whisper Michael sent to his father, "I'm still here, but in a way that make you prouder." And one morning, long after, as autumn tinted Chicago's avenues and the first leaves yellowed, he'd feel calm enough to consider returning. But before reclaiming kingship, he needed to complete his morning ritual with himself. No incense, just sweat and balls that never hit their mark on the first try. The fax bore just two words, placed with surgical precision to unleash maximum shock: "I'm back." On March 19, 1995, America awoke as if a needle had pierced the skin of its national sport. Michael Jordan returned, not as a guest star, but as a man who'd crossed a desert with sand in his lungs. The number 45 on his back was a reminder this wasn't the young man of the early 90s. This was a son who'd mourned in his own way and was learning to breathe again. His return game in Indiana was stiff, his steps heavy, but a few games later at Madison Square Garden, he unlocked the vault of memory and pulled out the double nickel 55 points, like a speech delivered without a microphone. New York fell silent as a cathedral when the final ball ricocheted off the backboard, landing in Bill Wennington's hands for the game sealer. They said the king hadn't forgotten the path to the throne, but a throne isn't a living room. It demands more than one transcendent night. The 1995 playoffs threw Chicago into the Eastern Conference semifinals against a young, hungry Orlando Magic. Nick Anderson slipped behind Jordan in Game 1's final moments, stole the ball, and tossed it ahead. The quip 45 isn't 23 spread like a needle in Pride's skin. In Game 2, Michael shed the symbolic mourning jersey, returning to number 23, but a number doesn't quicken your step. The Bulls fell 2-4. The Amway Arena's tunnel darkened as he left the court, hands on hips, propping up an emptiness. The mask of invincibility cracked since the summer of 1993, now shattered before the world. For many it was failure. For Michael, it was a to-do list. Summer 1995, Los Angeles blazed with sun, and the Space Jam set built a private dome for Jordan, the Jordan Dome. By day he filmed, by night, he forged himself like a warrior stripped of his title, running, lifting, pulling, shooting. Tim Grover crafted schedules like an obsessive composer, upper body for absorbing paint contact, calves for jumps less reliant on speed, and a new weapon, low-post fadeaways. The shot of a man no longer 23 but wiser than any 23 had ever been. He summoned stars from across the league to the Dome for pickup games. Reggie Miller, Patrick Ewing, Grant Hill, Juwan Howard. Matches without crowds but so intense even breathing felt taut. In those nights he'd look up at the Dome's dark ceiling, imagining Wilmington's sky, and nod faintly, a private ritual reminding him why he had to start again. Back in Chicago, he set small, unseen rules. Arrive earlier, leave later, demand more in every suicide sprint, every box-out drill. Phil Jackson knew he wasn't just training his body, he was rebuilding a storm-ravaged mental house. Scottie Pippen shouldered playmaking weight. Dennis Rodman, soon to join, would become the decade's wildest defensive engine. But before Rodman arrived, the core was Jordan's silent vow: no hand would steal a ball from his back in the final seconds again. The 1995-96 season opened like an industrial machine, cold, steady, devastating. In the team dining room, Jordan spoke little. On the practice court, he spoke through counting 1, 2, 3. The ball had to go in by the right number, if not, do it again. The 72-10 record wasn't a poster goal. It was the byproduct of hundreds of micro details standardized, of a no-compromise culture spreading from the cold-tiled showers to the strategy board. Each night, opponents brought their own stories, but the Bulls turned them into footnotes in their own saga. Jordan no longer charged like a 20-something. He dissected games like a surgeon: post-up pivot, step-back fadeaway, draw 2, dish to Kerr, draw 3, pass to Harper cutting in. Everything streamlined, but ruthless. They won in Salt Lake, Phoenix, Seattle, each victory a brick in a bridge to June. Some called that Bulls team an emotionless machine. Wrong. They had a heart, one that knew powerlessness. Because Jordan understood the gap between crowd roars and the silence behind locker room doors, he drilled his team on the unseen: defensive communication, screen angles, foot placement on pivots. When asked about 72-10, he gave a brief smile. Good, but we're not done. Regular season records were numbers. The debt to himself, and to 1995's shadow, was only payable in June. At times, amid the endless wins, Jordan grew quiet. One late evening at the United Center, with the big lights off and only pale fluorescence humming, he stood at the free throw line, sinking 10 shots no one counted. On the empty stands, wind whistled through seats like the city's whisper. He recalled his father's face, the slow nod after each win, and knew this journey, from the "I'm back" facts to new calluses on his hands, was to touch a lost piece. Unspoken, the team felt it this season wasn't just for winning, it was for mending memory. The return then wasn't just to the NBA, it was to a self severed by a gunshot. It was to an old language: labor, discipline, pride, spoken in the voice of a man who'd tasted limits. In the silence of closed practices, a truth emerged. Michael Jordan didn't want to reclaim what was, he wanted to rewrite how he got it. By late April 1996, Chicago closed the regular season at 72-10. Notebooks thickened, calves toughened, low-post fadeaways became instinct, and a city stood taller. In the locker room's far corner, the number 23 jersey hung crisp, fold sharp as a blade. No one needed to mention Orlando, Nick Anderson, or the stolen seconds 2 seasons prior. In the playoffs, every debt would be reopened. "I'm back" had been 2 words. Now it was a full sentence. "I'm back to finish what was left undone." As June loomed at the road's end, the man who'd walked through exile laced his sneakers tighter, ready for a new chapter where every stride echoed a vow. The past would not define the outcome. In June 1996, the noise at the United Center wasn't just cheers. It was a city dislodging a thorn stuck in its throat since the night Orlando eliminated them. Chicago crushed the Heat, swept the Cavs, and obliterated the Magic 4-0, as if sending Nick Anderson a postscript. Message received. The finals against the Seattle Supersonics pitted Gary Payton's dog block, Shawn Kemp's thunderous hammer, and George Karl's brain-tightening every weak joint. Before Game 1, Jordan paced the sideline like a man inspecting a house, rebuilt after a storm, deliberate not impulsive. When the ball went up, everything clicked like a blueprint honed in the Jordan Dome. Post up, shoulder lean, fadeaway draw 2, dish to Kerr, shift defense to fast break in 3 breaths. The Bulls led 3-0, then faltered as Payton clamped Jordan, exposing habits. At 3-2, Chicago's gut twitched with the memory. Everything can collapse. Game 6, Father's Day. Jordan clutched the trophy, gazing at the stands, imagining his father's familiar cap. It was the victory of an emotional engineer, using discipline to rebuild a heartbeat. The 72-10 season closed with a championship, and more crucially, an indelible scrawl. The 1995 debt was paid. But revenge always comes with a bill. In 1996-97, Jordan was no longer an arrow in endless flight. He was a blade honed steady. Dennis Rodman grabbed rebounds like pulling breath for the team. Pippen ripened another layer. Kerr was the fateful swish. Grueling schedules, red-eye flights, cold sandwiches, tight knees, aching backs. Small details piled into invisible weight. In the West, the Utah Jazz rose with Stockton and Malone, like a Swiss clock, precise, cold, tireless. The 1997 finals weren't just tactical chess, they were a clash of philosophies. Jordan's ruthless simplicity against the mechanical perfection of the pick and roll. Game 1, Jordan froze the clock with a shot over Russell. Game 3, Salt Lake City cranked the noise until the air vibrated. Then came Game 5, a night of legend and myth. Jordan's body staged a revolt, exhaustion, stomach upheaval, trembling legs. The flu game, some said flu, others food poisoning, was a duel between will and skull. 38 points wrung from drained muscles, each defensive stance a spinning sky. The image of Pippen propping Jordan like a falling lamppost, as the buzzer sounded seared into America's psyche. The king could stagger, weaken, need a shoulder. Revenge on fate sometimes came as temporary surrender to the body to save faith. The Bulls claimed their 5th title, but the cost climbed. The press zoomed in on Crow's feet, speculated on fatigue, judged nights Jordan played golf to decompress. He heard and ignored. What he didn't ignore was his body's alarms. Grover ramped up recovery drills, hot-cold cycles, stretching sessions so long they'd bore anyone else. At an age when stars conserved energy, Jordan shot more, pushed more, and most painfully, demanded more from those beside him. An empire doesn't stand still, it advances or crumbles. 1997-98 opened like a prolonged winter. Jerry Krause's public rift with Phil Jackson seeded whispers of a last dance in every locker room corner. The team walked a bridge they knew would be dismantled, parading while pulling its bolts. Some called it an administrative tragedy. Jordan turned it into fuel. Each game, he conducted like a maestro, knowing it was his final symphony. Tight tempo, rare rests, crescendos measured in breaths. A 62-20 record wasn't 72-10, but it reached June. Utah again, cold, orderly, relentless. The series stretched like a drumhead. Pippen's back ached, each step like walking on wire. Malone remained a tireless sledgehammer. Stockton stitched games with invisible thread. Game 5's home loss chased the Bulls to a cliff's edge. Everything hinged on Game 6 in Salt Lake. Austere, hostile, desert salt in the throat. The final seconds have been replayed in America's memory, until the tape wore thin, but in the moment, there was no soundtrack, just breathing. Malone posted low, Jordan slipped behind, flicked the ball like a cat, and pushed up court. 17 seconds, no timeout. Jordan drove like a man who knew every brick on the old road. A glimpse of Russell, a jab, a push, a crossover. Left hand set like a mold, right hand pulling the ball to its apex, releasing. Every cap in Salt Lake seemed blown back by wind. The shot fell. 5.2 seconds left. Stockton's 3-iron. Buzzer. Bulls champions. Jordan clenched his fist, holding it for seconds as if time might steal it. No one said revenge, then, but every debt from 1995, every strained tendon of 1997, every argument, every torn poster in the locker room, marked paid. The bill came due instantly. The dynasty dissolved almost that night. Phil left, Pippen left, Rodman left, pieces scattered like spent fireworks. Jordan walked off, clutching his shadow like a piece of youth laid down. The cost of staying at the peak too long was no flat path down, only a cliff. He chose to leap, whether at peace, no one knew. While fans debated the hand on Russell's hip, while statisticians parsed true shooting and usage rates, Jordan sat long in the locker room, towel overhead, revenge complete, crown secured, but the body bore small unread words, an Achilles less elastic, knees grumbling at dawn, a back demanding double-length stretches. Each win hoisted a trophy, each trophy slipped another lead weight into the victor's pocket. The second three-peat, then, wasn't just a gallery of immortal snapshots, it was a worksite log of a soul calculating losses, accepting hate, enduring accusations of harshness, trading youth's carelessness for a final definition of victory. Revenge and its price weren't sequential chapters, they were two sides of the same coin. One Jordan flipped, caught and tucked away just before the lights dimmed. In the quiet between debt paid and exhausted, a perfect man saw himself as one of us, just human, learning to let go of the gold without losing the dignity built from a lifetime of enduring. After the shot in Salt Lake and the buzzer that sealed a dynasty, Michael thought he'd earned a moment to breathe. But as the fireworks faded, he realized the real trial was just beginning, and the judge was none other than the legend named Michael Jordan. To be judged by one's own myth means every step thereafter is weighed, heavier or lighter than the monument erected in collective memory. The peak years had crafted a polished mic in commercials, drink Gatorade to fly, wear airs to transcend. But the real man lived amid questions hissing through the public's teeth. Was he always perfect? Did he never stumble? Was he always the role model for our kids? Glory became a prison. When fans demanded a smiling saint, brands needed a wrinkle-free persona, and the press craved stories sharp enough for front pages. At the center was Michael, a flesh-and-blood individual with habits, passions, and harmless adult flaws. But his era didn't allow harmless. Everything had a price. From the early 1990s, the Atlantic City story was a nail hammered relentlessly. The night during the 1993 Knicks series when Jordan hit a casino with his father, then played the next day. He was interrogated. Could an icon step out of character? Could a son walk beside his father under flickering neon? A book by a gambler boasting of beating Jordan poured fuel. Then, when his father was murdered that summer, some cold minds in newsrooms dared draw heartless connections. Michael denied. Investigations found no link. But those who live by image know truth takes time. Rumors only need headlines. Being judged by one's own legend meant the fame that once lifted him now swung like a hammer, turning everyday choices into evidence in a collective moral trial. In the Be Like Mike years blanketing America's highways, Jordan learned the power and exhaustion of being loved on contract. Loved as long as he was infallible. Loved as long as he didn't disappoint the kids. But basketball didn't teach how to answer interviews about humanity. It taught how to handle traps and double teams. Michael learned silence. Silence when choosing where to stand in political storms. Silence when his name floated in debates about a black icon's role in pop culture. Silence even when he knew it would be read as selfishness. He acted in his own way, funding scholarships, supporting clinics, working behind walls, deeds too quiet for screaming headlines, but durable enough to stitch credibility over years. And here emerged the harshest verdict, not from haters, but from the shadow of MJ that America had deified. Every post-1998 shot charity game or pickup was measured against the Salt Lake tremor, every frown compared to the old steely gaze, every smile weighed against the Be Like Mike grin. Siblings, teammates, coaches knew Michael wasn't wax. He tired, raged, joked, envied, forgave. A full human palette. But a legend shared by a nation allowed only two colors, white of perfection, black of ruin. So Jordan was pushed into the gray, fighting to stay on the pedestal while resisting the temptation to live its scripted role. The trial wasn't just on the court, It seeped into his veins. A heartbeat at dawn. Am I still worthy of yesterday's me? Such questions could erode a soul, unless that soul redefined worthy, not for the monument, but for the son, father, teammate, team owner, citizen. When he returned in number 23 and climbed the peak again, Michael beat rivals, but leaving a crumbling empire, facing rumors and dissecting columns that ate at his skin. He met his final opponent, the myth's demand for immortality. Some nights he answered with a cold smile, some with 30 minutes of solo free throws, some with calls to an old coach, some with silent listens to his kids' stories. Being judged by one's legend meant using the ordinary to defy the extraordinary verdict. Ironically, the grinding machine of public plus brand plus media made his human moments shine brighter. The embrace with Pippen in the flu game, the brief shrug to care after a play, the hand on a trembling rookie's shoulder. There the legend lost to the man, not because the man was perfect, but because he dared admit limits. Later, when his 2009 Hall of Fame speech sparked debate for its still-burning competitive fire at 40+, the public reopened old files. Was Jordan petty or honest? Did he nurse grudges or stay true to the engine that carried him from Wilmington's backyard to the summit? The answer, as always, wasn't monochrome. But if one line could close this chapter of being judged, it might be this: a monument doesn't accuse or defend itself. It stands letting passers-by see what they wish. Meanwhile, Michael, the man inside the monument, kept living, training, loving, erring, mending. And in that journey, he quietly won the greatest case, convincing himself he didn't need to be like Mike every second to still be Michael Jordan. A man good enough, brave enough to bear the light and shadow cast by his own legend. When the dust of the Bulls era settled, and the pedestal called MJ hardened into America's memory, Michael chose a path few icons dare, returning to work. First in an office, then back to the hardwood in a different jersey, with a body beginning to negotiate time's toll. The Washington Wizards invited him to reshape their culture as president of basketball operations, armed with the experience of an empire. But numbers and spreadsheets lacked the sweat of the gym, and Michael realized what he'd always known: the game's soul lived on the wood, not behind glass doors. In September 2001, he announced his return to playing. The number 23 jersey appeared at MCI Center like a childhood summons. Kids who grew up with Bulls posters now brought their own children to point at a man who'd transcended sports borders. This comeback wasn't a coronation, it was a march against the wind. At 38, his left knee grumbled some mornings, his heels stiffened like rusty hinges. An index finger, once severed by a cigar cutter, still wasn't fully cooperative. Yet in the early weeks, the old fire burned hot enough to melt doubts. A 51-point night against Charlotte, 45 against New Jersey, telegrams from the past stamped "still here." Crowds rose when he took the ball at the elbow, counting the rhythm of his pivot like memorizing a classic dance. He no longer tore through space like in his 20s. He broke the game's tempo: low post-up, shoulder nudge, half step back, fadeaway. Each point was a footnote on skill, experience, and reading the game like reading human nature. But amid those standing ovation nights, his body whispered a different report: swollen knees after flights, a back seizing in cold weather, calves reminding him memories don't fuel forever. Jordan still dragged teammates through grueling practices, demanding precise screen angles, hip pivots on cuts, scolding even a slow blink on closeouts. The rookies, including the high school kid picked first, Kwame, faced a harsh school, taught in Jordan's soul language, uncompromising discipline. Some broke, some grew, and through the friction, a message surfaced: without magic, victory meant making the ordinary perfect. The winter of 2001 moved slower than expected. Michael remained an all-star, partly for skill, partly for a collective need to farewell an icon in the spotlight. In the locker room, he sometimes sat still with ice on his knee, eyes staring nowhere. Tying his laces, he knew he was bargaining each afternoon with pains that wouldn't fully leave. He donated his entire first season's salary to 9/11's relief funds, a quiet, clear choice. Basketball mattered, but events beyond the court redefined meaning. By February 2002, his right knee rebelled fiercely. An arthroscopy inserted a weary comma into an unfinished story. The Wizards faltered without him. He had to learn a skill unneeded in his fiery years: watching teammates fight without helping. The surgery succeeded, but the season effectively ended for the stubborn king. In silence, bitterness flowed beneath his skin. He returned to lead, but the path was muddier than planned. For 2002-03, Michael chose one more year, not to polish a stat sheet, but to fulfill an unforced duty, teaching a young team what professionalism meant. He took few privileges, flew commercial with the team, sat beside youngsters to explain why a half-foot adjustment on a catch could shift a game. At 40, he played all 82 games, a defiant milestone, swapping ice packs each morning, tightening wraps each night. No more 50-point nights, but countless 20-point 40-minute slogs, rare chase-down blocks igniting nostalgic roars, and precise passes turning ordinary rookies into local heroes. MCI Center learned to rise when he entered and hold its breath when he fell. In February 2003, Atlanta hosted the All-Star Game. Initially short of votes for a starting spot, a young star, Vince yielded his place. At introductions, lights dimmed, Michael Jordan rang like a church bell, and he stepped out, a thin smile, eyes glistening. The game unfolded with flair, and in regulation's end, he sank a shot echoing the shot of his later life, ball in curtain nearly down. But overtime arrived, and history chose a less perfect end. Kevin Garnett took MVP, while Jordan sat watching a laughing, crying crowd. A lesson at 40, sometimes poetry yields to plain prose, and dignity lies in accepting it. The Wizards missed the playoffs both seasons. Cold February losses in Milwaukee held no romance. Tense practices sparked arguments. Young players pushed back, and headlines probed. Is Jordan ruining the locker room? He didn't argue. He took the team to dinner, arrived earlier, stepped back in press conferences to let youngsters speak. But on his final farewell, Philadelphia, April 16, 2003, questions paused for minutes. With 1:44 left in the fourth, the coach pulled him. The crowd stood, opponents clapped, even referees held the ball a tick longer, stretching the ritual. He raised a hand in thanks, eyes red, lips pressed into a thin line. The final bus left the arena, Jordan in the back seat, watching lights recede like a rewinding film. By standings, the second comeback was a failure. But by sport's rare measure, embracing limits, it was a quiet triumph. He taught a locker room how to work, a city that some heroes play 82 games just to teach endurance, and himself that pride could coexist with aging if you bowed at the right time. The bitterest part wasn't losing, but the body's betrayal, mornings when knees forbade running, nights when tendons whispered, don't. He learned to thank what remained, a mind reading games like poetry, deft hands, instincts for pacing, stop-go step-back skills needing no speed, and credibility making youths listen, even if they didn't always agree. After the farewell, ties with the Wizards frayed, when management diverged from his vision, another scar of the post-Bulls life. But those scars later fueled his path to owning a team elsewhere, shaping a culture from the roots. The Washington return, bitter as its name, completed a late coming of age, a king learning to be an old soldier, an icon learning to be human. That lesson became a foundation when new losses, controversies, a divisive speech, grief, age, arrived. Because Michael knew some victories hold no trophy, shaped instead like a man walking slowly, breathing evenly, still lifting a young teammate stumbling on the hardwood, even as his own knees groaned. When his body taught him the lesson of limits, the world reminded him of another stage, the public. Michael Jordan wasn't just a man's name, it was the title of a media commerce memory empire spanning over 3 decades. In the early 1990s, the Be Like Mike campaign thrust his image into family kitchens, schoolyards, bars, parks. Wherever a round ball and a dream of jumping an extra inch existed, his name was there. Space Jam turned him into a cinematic figure, threading a line between kids and legend in Hollywood's way, a witty tale laced with a sturdy message of resilience. And Air Jordan, from a sneaker find for its non-standard colors, grew into its own ecosystem, each release a cultural storm, overnight lines, flashing billboards, collecting stories becoming a shared slang across generations. On the surface it was the American dream, talent plus discipline plus commerce = icon. Beneath, it was a machine demanding endless energy, being in the right place, giving flawless answers, staying tireless in playing Michael Jordan even when Michael the man just wanted a walk where no one noticed. He understood each successful ad stitched another thread into the legend's cloak, but the thicker the cloak, the heavier it hung. When a nation decides "be like Mike" is its morning mantra, Mike loses the right to err, let alone tire. Brands needed stability. The public demanded inspiration. The media craved stories. The man in the middle had only slivers of time to breathe. The first downside of glory was privacy ground to a hollow core. Dinners meant to be just dinners became impromptu autograph sessions. Vacations meant for beaches turned into security drills. Each hotel lobby walk felt like crossing a stage with a script shifting by the minute. The friendliness in ads made strangers think they knew him. The necessary coldness of the locker room made acquaintances call him distant. Glory didn't just increase workload, it scrambled the very meaning of near and far in human connection. At a deeper level, the public empire placed Michael before endless moral trials. A stray comment torn from context could symbolize apathy or pragmatism. A business decision whether to create jobs, support communities, or sustain a legacy could be spun as profit over all. He often chose silence at political crossroads, knowing any stance would split the crowd. That silence was interpreted every which way. He learned to accept that the public didn't see the quiet acts, funding health initiatives, long-term education commitments, discreet visits to lift sick children's spirits. The public empire judged not by days but by seconds of a soundbite. In that metric, he honed a new skill, not being swept away by the moment's riptide. Another subtler downside: standards. When people saw him as the measure of peak, they graded others by his ruler, and sometimes judged him against his own 20-year-old self. That fueled sports discipline but was cruel to a man's aging body and mind. He couldn't run as he once did, obvious, but few wanted to hear it. They craved an illusion, a legend defying time's gravity. In that gap, Michael tightened other bolts: finesse, breathing, leadership, business, creating paths for others. Unable to be like Mike as a physical act, he chose build with Mike as a social one, investing in a basketball team, building organizations, crafting community programs, paving ways for young talent. The public empire ran its own economy: sneakerheads, resale, collecting culture. Each new shoe release birthed invisible stories: a kid saving summer job money for a retro pair, a middle-aged man resting on teenage memories, a young woman leaping past women's shoe lines because she loved the S-curves. These beautiful tales coexisted with grim ones: shoving, fights, black markets. Michael couldn't control the darkness, but knew an icon's duty: safer release designs, retailer partnerships, a message that value lies not in owning but in living with it. Here, he saw something strange. His namesake product had outgrown the court, touching music, fashion, photography, design, an ecosystem where he was both nucleus and spectator. Glory, like any great energy, could dazzle or burn. The wizard's years taught him to walk in shade. The public empire taught him to weave shade into his blueprint. He no longer appeared in every campaign, answered every question. He showed up where lasting value grew: a Wilmington clinic opening, a $100 million pledge for social justice, a NASCAR team expanding opportunities sky for young drivers. Glory found balance when bridged to others. The deepest downside of glory was how it made people forget sorrow. For Michael, that was impossible. From Father's Day 1996 to Kobe's 2020 eulogy, from icing knees in Washington to a strained smile at the Hall of Fame, he carried a reminder: behind every billboard was a man who'd age, pant, sometimes need to cry. A lasting public empire had to center that man, not just the logo. That's what he did, stepping back from the spotlight to let light fall on what needed to grow after him. In doing so, he restored glory's finest shape: not thunder, but the steady footsteps of a man walking through a crowd, face uncovered, needing no chance, yet knowing exactly what he was building to leave behind. Springfield, September 2009. The circular hall of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame glowed like a living monument, where history was rewritten not in points but in memories. Michael stepped out in a dark suit, his smile thin as a pencil line, the kind of smile from someone who knew today wasn't just for thanks. For most, the Hall of Fame is a canonization. For him, it was a self-opened trial. Once again. And then, people heard Jordan in a way rarely told: not the saint blessing dreams, but the warrior keeping a ledger. He honored his teachers, revering Dean Smith, thanking Roy Williams, but also slipped a blade into old wounds. The high school coach who didn't pick him for varsity as a sophomore. the old friend who joked, "I could guard you." Brian Russell, the taunts, skeptical glances, the impossibles that clung to his life like thorns. Some in the room laughed, others frowned. Outside, America stood ready to judge. Was this pettiness, or raw honesty about the gritty fuel of a champion? In minutes, that speech pulled the MJ statue off its gilded pedestal, exposing seams and cracks, what he called fuel. For Jordan, victory didn't bloom from praise. It sprouted from remembered slights. "You guys gave me motivation," he said, voice low, each word striking metal. It wasn't a pretty speech by PR standards. It was a confession of survival's mechanics. "I thrive by reminding myself I'm not enough." People wanted a simple ode to gratitude. He gave a psychological sketch, and here, the invisible cut emerged. An unquenchable hunger. The loneliness of a man who burned himself to light the court. That cut for the first time was held under the spotlight, not for forgiveness, but to explain why the path to the top was only a foot wide. The reaction, predictably, polarized like a tidal wave. Some called him petty, a king still tallying grudges. Others saw the truest portrait of a competitive genius, a man who turned doubts into bricks, criticisms into cement, building modern sport's longest bridge. Both views touched the same truth. A legend isn't a seamless cloak, it's a patched one. In those patches were a childhood craving to be seen, the July 1993 night, the smell of knee ice in Washington, the moment he paused to hear his own breathing. Some cuts weren't on the skin. They lived in the habit of self-questioning. Today, am I worthy of that name? The Hall of Fame, thought to be a period, became an open parenthesis. Standing among sepia photos of predecessors, Jordan didn't recite self-praise. He traced an undercurrent from Wilmington's backyard, pushed to JV to Chapel Hill's discipline, to Boston Garden's 63 points beyond safety, to Salt Lake's shot a heartbeat short. It all led to a formula. His speech unwittingly revealed, glory is a collection of well-managed wounds. Without the invisible cut, the slights, oversights, doubts, there'd be no such engine. And without learning to bandage those cuts right, glory would fester. That night, amid scattered laughs and frowns, Michael said something more for himself than the audience. "Thank you for being my obstacles." Some saw it as bravado. In the bigger picture, it was testimony to a labor philosophy. Don't treat insults as dregs, but as protein. That evening, he didn't sugarcoat the blades that cut him. He showed how he turned them into surgical tools, to dissect the game, himself fear, and he closed with family, his mother, wife, kids, with embraces, a soft fold in the steel. Post-Hall, hundreds of columns dissected the real Jordan, but the invisible cut wasn't for public consensus, it was for the man to see his path. For Michael, that path meant accepting he wasn't every ideal's model, he was proof of something truer. Greatness doesn't demand constant crowd-approved kindness, but responsibility to work, teammates, and community beyond the lights. In later years, with a $100 million pledge for social justice, community clinics, a tearful eulogy for Kobe, the cut found resolution in acts needing no applause. People saw Jordan again, not the trophy hoister, but the man bowing to loss, opening his wallet to shared pain, stepping off the pedestal for the next generation. That, perhaps, was the true Hall of Fame of a life, not Springfield's relief, but a list of cuts healed by easing others' pain. At its core, the 2009 speech, controversial as it was, became an honest chapter in the larger book. It said Michael Jordan's path always had thorns, and those thorns kept him from sleeping on silk. The invisible cut, once feared to be touched, he brought to light, and from there it ceased to rule, becoming a companion, reminding him daily, keep working, loving, owning responsibility. The rest, history will handle. Springfield, February 2015. Dean Smith passed, and the hall where Michael faced his invisible cut in 2009 echoed with a different resonance, the quiet closing of a spiritual father's eyes. The memorial in Chapel Hill was pure Dean, humble, brief, precise as a simple pass that shifts the game. Michael sat in the pews, hands clasped like waiting for a free throw. His mind replayed foggy mornings, the coach's light touch on his elbow, saying one less dribble, the reminder to point to the passer after a layup, small rituals holding a grand philosophy, team first, self second. A detail moved many to tears in his will. Dean left each player a small check for a dinner out, a final, meticulous gesture that life isn't just scores. Jordan received that envelope like a bonus lesson. Discipline builds careers, kindness builds memories. The spiritual father's journey ended. The void left wasn't filled with trophies, but with the duty to pass that thread to the next generation. The years that followed felt like an unscripted season of eulogies. Early 2020, David Stern, the legendary commissioner who globalized the NBA, passed. Weeks later, phones shattered with news. Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gianna died in a helicopter crash. Staples Center became an impromptu cathedral of shared grief. Michael stepped up, gripped the mic, and his tears fell like a well's cap was lifted. When Kobe Bryant died, a part of me died too, he said, voice hoarse from a man long unused to public weeping. Amid sobs, he cracked a self-deprecating jest. I'm gonna have another crying meme. The room laughed through tears, a fleeting reprieve before returning to the truth. This wasn't an icon eulogizing an icon, but a brother farewelling a brother. In the minutes that followed, Michael spoke of 11:30 p.m. texts, 3 a.m. questions about pivot feet, half-step blocks in the post, shoulder angles on mid-range shots, tiny concerns crafting a giant character. Kobe was my little brother, he called him, and in little hearts heard their own crack. It was a rare Michael Jordan, soft, raw, shedding the competitive armor to embrace a loss with no rematch. That year, history's irony halted the world. The pandemic stopped courts, emptied stands, and drove people to screens. April 2020, The Last Dance aired 10 episodes stitched from archives, replaying peak seasons, rages, doubts, private locker room eulogies. A locked-down America revisited the 1990s like pilgrims. Young fans learned why a step back could pause millions of hearts. Older ones sat kids down, recounting grandpa's black-and-white TV and cracked concrete courts. Michael, from a dim room, watched his younger self, hot, harsh, sometimes excessive. The series broke records, stirring love and ire. Some teammates felt scrutinized too closely. Some viewers met the real Jordan, not slogan, not poster. And in that tension, Michael did what it had for 3 decades, became a mirror, reflecting each viewer's peace. But beneath soaring ratings and debate storms, a quieter current flowed. The Last Dance turned remembrance into a family ritual. Over locked-down dinners, people learned legacy, not just through highlights, but in how a man handled pain, his own and others. That same year, a smaller loss to the world, but vast to Michael, struck. John Michael Wozniak, the curly-haired guard with the celebratory shimmy, in a behind-the-scenes clip, passed before the series ended. The internet laughed at the guard's swaggering shrug. Michael smiled sadly. Another link from those years broke. The season of eulogies wasn't always televised. Sometimes it was a phone call, a sent wreath, a night staring at the ceiling. Amid these losses, what kept Michael afloat wasn't legend. It was the ritual of being human. He called Kobe's mother, checked on his wife and kids. He wrote quiet checks for hospitals, scholarships, frontline equity funds. When Wilmington opened community clinics named for his parents, a thread came full circle. The boy who craved being seen now helped heal the often unseen. In each act, Dean Smith lingered invisibly. Point to the passer, turn your spotlight to others. The fathers and brothers in Michael's life weren't just titles. They were scaffolding when time stole footing. James Jordan taught him to dream and rise. Dean Smith turned dreams into systems. David Stern built a stage wide enough for him, and a generation. Kobe reminded him, hunger was a heritable flame, passed from brother to brother, via 3 a.m. pivot foot texts. So when Michael said, "A part of me died," he wasn't just mourning loss. He was naming a new equation for life past 50. Live what remains worthy of what's gone. The extended season of eulogies taught him a once foreign skill, crying at the right time. Once, he wept alone in dark rooms after playoff losses. Now he wept publicly, embracing another family's pain, and those tears led a generation, especially men, admit a simple truth: strength and fragility coexist. As Bill Russell and other sports elders passed, Michael sent brief messages: no flourish, no stage, but enough to show he still did what his fathers taught: honor the game and its framers. At the journey's end, honoring others was how he healed himself. Each wreath laid was a promise raised to keep working, opening doors, holding standards. If youth's glory was proving I can, maturity's dignity was proving we can. We, including those gone before, and the young coming after. In the Chapel Hill church bells of 2015, the white flower applause of Los Angeles in 2020, the warm soup at a Wilmington clinic in 2021, that thread didn't break, it passed hands. Fathers and brothers left the court, but the light at its edge lingered, enough for a man through his season of eulogies to find his way forward, quieter, slower, surer, toward what was worth leaving behind. After the prolonged season of eulogies and heavy lessons, life invited Michael back to another place. Home, not the mansion filled with trophies and framed photos, but a rhythm where children's laughter filled silences, where a simple dinner ended a long enough day, where the man could shed the MJ armor to be Michael, husband, father, quiet neighbor. The story restarted gently but resolutely, a 2013 wedding to Yvette Preteo, a woman who knew when to say no, who kept just enough distance from the spotlight to give her husband room to breathe. A year later, twin daughters arrived. From then, an icon's schedule shifted like a river, finding a new current: low-sodium breakfasts, school drop-offs, golf course stops, quick brand team meetings, then home for bedtime stories. Some nights, a book paused for a work call. Others, a call was declined for a child's earnest question. "Dad, why does the moon follow our car?" In that moment, golden trophies stood silent, and the answer demanded a man soften to grow wiser. Rebuilding a home didn't mean denying the past. A wall held the shot from 1998, another from 1982. Between them, a photo of a father hugging his daughters under Florida sun, hair tousled, shirt wrinkled. Jordan didn't hide the crow's feet. He used them as commas in a prose chapter. Afternoon walks with his wife, calls to grown kids about work and health, timely birthday wishes. When a life endures such scrutiny and skepticism, family became the only place judged by simple measures. Were you there on time? Did you listen long enough? Did you teach by example or just words? Yvette wasn't a backdrop. She was the conductor of rhythm. She knew when to open the house to friends' laughter, when to close it to shield the living room from gusts. She nudged Michael to put down his phone, gently pushed him to the backyard, letting sun dissolve accumulated stress. The man, accustomed to fighting with harshness, learned small acts of tenderness: washing dishes after dinner, folding blankets at dawn, listening to Latin music because his wife loved it. He discovered a different flow, not the court's roar but a river's calm. When a daughter leaned on his shoulder, time stopped counting. In that orbit, Michael and his family laid bricks for a house larger than their own community. A $100 million, decade-long pledge for social justice wasn't impulsive. It stemmed from years of asking, "What do I owe the place that raised me?" Community clinics in North Carolina, named for his parents, opened with white lights, antiseptic smells, and nurses' quiet nods. Places for children's shots, workers' tests, where an expired insurance card wasn't a health sentence. Under Novant Health, Michael Jordan Family Clinic's signs, a legacy shifted from 1990s, "Be like Mike," to today's "Be there Mike," present for unseen needs. He walked ribbon cuttings as a son, not a mogul, thanking parents first, praising medical teams, and when stepping off the podium, he bent to tie his shoes, an old Wilmington habit, like tightening a new promise. Concurrently, Make-A-Wish received a record donation for his 60th birthday, a gift whose story lived in photos with sick children, smiles on pale faces, tiny hands gripping a legend's dark fingers, and a strange stillness after cameras stopped. Sometimes joy needed no sound. Many thought Michael only spoke victory's language. He'd learned a second: presence. Softening didn't mean abandoning standards. In work, he was still himself, meeting Jordan brand teams, discussing retro colorway fabrics, checking toe stitching, refining campaign copy. Don't overplay the narrator, light up the real story. But post-meeting, he stepped back, letting creative directors speak, steadying young designers, ensuring juniors felt seen, the feeling a Wilmington boy once craved. In NASCAR, 23XF Racing opened another stage for opportunity: roaring tracks, burning rubber, black and white flags, a different American alphabet. Jordan knew racing long lacked entry points for non-traditional faces. He co-founded and invested, not as a guest but to build team, process, sponsorship, culture. In small meetings, He told young drivers about generational pressure on their shoulders, then grinned. Pressure doesn't vanish. You learn to breathe with it. A court lesson, it turned out, was a life lesson. From his private home, he kept things unloud. Tabloids loved publishing addresses, decor details. He chose locked gates. Neighbors knew a different Michael, lightly knocking to borrow garden tools, waving to security, driving slowly after school drop-offs. His daily schedule read like a short poem: morning pilots, stretching noon, scholarship group meeting afternoon, a few golf holes, evening family dinner, phones limited. His daughters asked about the old days. He shared curated snippets, enough to spark curiosity, not to let a giant past crush their childhood. When they slept, he lit a lamp to read leadership and psychology, not to teach, but to learn how a winner's innate selfishness could be shaped into compassion. Softening also meant learning to apologize. Some days he snapped over a long call. That night he knocked on his daughter's door, said sorry, explained adults err too. At 60 plus, that lesson was tougher than any move he'd mastered, bowing to someone smaller, not for image, but because it was right. Home wasn't just refuge, it was a moral lab, where a man who spent youth being right now learned to be good. In his private sky, calls with his mother and siblings stayed steady. His grown kids, Jeffrey, Marcus, Jasmine, forged their paths. He listened, teaching only when asked. Experience is sweetest when someone asks for a piece, he'd say smiling. When dinner hosted guests, a mentee, a young creator, an up-and-coming athlete, he spoke less of shots, more of habits. Arrive early, leave late, handwrite small goals. Above all, keep a promise to yourself. When lights dim, outside the world roared. New controversies awaited any icon. But at home, Michael practiced a different courage, not reflexively countering noise, choosing long-term projects over tomorrow's headlines, standing beside others under the lens with a hand on their shoulder. Sometimes on a day when winds shifted, he drove a long road, played a slow song, thought of his father, Dean, Kobe. Grief didn't vanish, it moved from eyes to heart, then dissolved into choices. Another clinic, another scholarship, another timely embrace. That's how a life softened, trading thunder for gentle rain, dunks for nods, loud promises for signed commitments. On rare, truly quiet nights, when sea breeze carried salt into the living room, Michael stood by the glass, seeing himself and his family reflected, not rigid statues, but soft moving shadows. Tomorrow, he'd be an icon again. Tonight, a man. In that graceful shift, a home was rebuilt, not with stone walls, but with repeated small gestures, being there, listening, giving. From there a new Michael Jordan emerged, not blazing like fireworks, but warm like kitchen light, bright enough to guide, gentle enough to linger. At an age softened and grateful, Michael discovered the hardest role wasn't hero but leader, the one forced to choose between options, all with costs. In Charlotte, he stepped from icon to owner, a seat both high and cold. As a minority black owner in the NBA's ranks, he carried hope and a microscope, every decision doubly scrutinized. When the team faltered, local papers blamed conservative management. Fans asked, why no big star signings? In small meeting rooms, with whiteboards full of arrows and glowing spreadsheets, Michael learned a stark truth. Leadership wasn't picking the perfect option. It was choosing the least bad among four imperfect ones, then owning the fallout. He believed in building foundations, finding the right GM, hiring a principled coach, investing in player development, setting a culture of punctuality, intensity, respect. Some moves hit, drafting Kemba, later LaMelo. Others missed, and leadership meant not passing blame. In review meetings, he listened more than spoke, asking precise questions. Why this coverage? Have we assessed injury risks enough? Is anyone in the locker room straining under a discipline gap? Outside, people wondered if Michael's ego meddled inside. Colleagues saw a man yielding final calls to a reasoned system. This was the mature absolute demand. Not I'm right, but what's right must win, even if it came from another. Then, in 2023, a painful yet calm decision, selling controlling interest in the team. Not from lost love, but from loving enough to know another should steer. He kept a stake, stayed on culture's doorstep, but lifted his hands from the wheel. The night he signed, he held the pen like a basketball, firm, slow, steady. It wasn't failure, It was an unsung leadership tenet, stepping back so the organization could move forward, and by stepping back, he freed his hands to lift something else. 23SF for racing. In NASCAR, the track differed from hardwood. Engine roars drowned dialogue. Tactics shifted in milliseconds. Michael didn't enter to hang his name on a garage door. He built systems, hiring for values and skill, prioritizing data, enforcing safety, and crucially opening doors for diverse talent. When Bubba Wallace faced a storm of controversy, 23SF didn't flinch. The racing team, a symbol of Southern America, stood firm. We win by speed, lose by duty. That leadership lacked highlights, but bore lasting impact. Drivers felt protected, sponsors found purpose, staff knew they were building beyond a podium. Michael admitted he wasn't a car tech expert. Leadership was finding those better than him, empowering them, shielding them from crowds when needed. In morning garage talks, he asked engineers about airflow, pit crew chiefs about 0.2-second errors, young drivers about breathing in the final 5 laps. Leadership, he explained, was teaching a team to breathe with pressure, a lesson from the free throw line. That's why painful decisions went beyond trades or contracts. They were not doing choices, not meddling in locker rooms when his voice was just ego, not swapping coaches for a week's praise, not pulling community funds when economies soured. In brand strategy workshops, he repeated, if a decision dims the dignity of those involved, players, staff, fans, it's wrong, no matter the profit. Not a slogan, but a filter to keep the public empire from eroding the man at its core. Old wounds, losing his father, the crown's loneliness, nights of creaking knees, became moral censors. He knew scrutiny's sting, so he built spaces for young people to err safely, fix respectfully, grow in clear expectations. Yet leadership didn't dodge attacks. Some Hornets seasons sank. Social media dubbed him a bad owner. He didn't counter on stages, he countered in process, revamping European scouting, updating injury recovery protocols, investing in sports psychology. Leadership was taking hits for the organization, and still waking early. At home, Yvette saw a different fatigue, not of scoring, but of staying calm when others boiled. Some evenings he returned, sat quietly on the porch, listening to the wind. The hardest decision, he said, wasn't selling or buying, it was admitting, I don't control everything. An ego once fed by clutch shots, learning the word enough. But enough wasn't surrender, it was knowing his limits to empower others, helping the organization surpass its own. He taught an old skill, break goals small. For the team it was 10 games, run 2% better in third quarters, cut turnovers by 1.5, add 1 screen assist. For the racing team, 5 laps, shave 0.1 seconds off pit stops, tweak wing angles by a degree. When a giant tree bears no fruit, it feeds the soil. Michael became a soil tender, a role rarely etched on plaques, but without it, the garden withers. When he stepped back from Hornets control, he sent a simple message to staff. Thank you for working in the light and the shade. Shade, his word, was leadership's bulk. Shade of uncelebrated decisions, private coaching sessions, checks signed without press conferences. The man once fueled by fireworks learned to love shade, where seeds grow. In private life, he practiced lessons from stormy seasons. Listen longer than you want to speak. Choose the long road over the short. Own mistakes before ego allows. Leadership at its core was another word for service. Painful decisions proved it. Only those who lower themselves can lift others higher. If once Michael raised a golden trophy to explode a city, now he raised a young generation in Charlotte, Wilmington, on racetracks, to explode in their own way. Old glory was thunder. Today's leadership was steady rain. Both were needed for a green season. At 62, Michael woke before dawn as always. Not the habit of an old athlete, but the discipline of a man who'd learned peace doesn't come unbidden. It must be prepared. A slow stretch, a few Pilates moves to coax a stubborn back, a glass of warm water to nudge the body awake. Outside, the sky shifted from deep purple to milky gray. In his mind, a gentle list emerged. Visit the Wilmington Clinic. Check on a new scholarship. Quick, 23/7 racing meeting. Home for dinner on time. No item screamed legend, but each defined a new kind of victory. At this age, tragedy didn't vanish. It changed roles. The loss of his father was a distant echo, demanding every decision answer. What would Dad think? Dean Smith's absence was a quiet yardstick. Am I pointing to the passer or just chasing more spotlight? Kobe was a wound never fully healed. Each park kid practicing a step back rang an alarm of duty. Give them a safe place to train, the right mentor, faith that miracles are built from habits. Tragedy became a tutor, not gentle, but fair, teaching the only lesson worth learning: start again daily, in small things. In fame's roaring world, he chose low volume. No longer obliged to fill every frame, he entered different scenes: a clinic's reception, where a young mother asked about shots; a school hallway, where a girl raised her hand for a scholarship; a racing garage, where a young driver eyed data with headlight-bright eyes; a nod, a keep going, an email approving a budget. Gestures unfit for headlines became his starring role. When asked, "What still excites you at this age?" he smiled, seeing others do what they thought impossible. Glory's measure shifted, from his own shots to another's. On his desk, no play diagrams, but connection maps: school clinic, scholarship, business racing team, local club. Michael saw this as life's triangle offense: pass to the right person, at the right time, in the right spot, and the whole team advances. Glory's old cost was loneliness. Its later dividend was belonging to a giving network. When history stirred, new greatest ever lists, cross-era debates, he stepped back softly. The game's bigger than comparisons. Not evasion, but the fruit of a journey through both extremes, adored and judged. He knew spotlight's blind, so he wore humility's shades. Nothing left to prove, but much to protect the game's dignity. Chances for those coming, the spark of social justice newly lit. To protect, he kept himself ready to restart, body fit enough, mind soft enough, ego low enough. This noon, he visited the family-named clinic. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic, with nurses' soft steps. A middle-aged man picked up blood pressure meds. An elderly woman asked about follow-ups. A child stacked Legos in a play corner. Michael stood by a handwritten sign. No one turned away for lack of insurance, touching the wood like he once touched a trophy, tenderly gratefully. Once, be like Mike was a cultural command. Now be there. Mike was a moral pledge. Being present where needed, that was victory, without a scoreboard. That afternoon, a racing team meeting began with a simple question: what did we learn today? An engineer spoke of wing angles, a driver of steering wheel tremors at high speed, a pit crew chief of a 0.2-second wheel swap error. Michael listened, then shared an old story. He and Phil Jackson once fixed a foot placement habit, drilling until the body forgot the flaw. Track or court, it's the same: big things hinge on small things repeated. His voice didn't command, it guided, carefully laying the first brick of a tall tower, knowing a strong base keeps upper floors steady. Late afternoon, a stop at Jordan Brand's office. A new retro sat on the table, stitching leather gauge, colorway debated like a philosophy exam. Michael asked, does this colorway story make someone feel seen? A small school team, a community, a young artist. The brand, once built on speed, now thrived on meaning. Old Glory never dimmed, he just tilted it to light beyond his circle. Evening brought a folksy ritual: simple food, stories free of history or legacy, schoolwork, a new song, the neighbor's cat. When a phone buzzed with hot news, he let it rest, listening on. After clearing dishes, he stepped to the porch, gazing at stars sharper in the cool night. Old grief sat beside him, like a friend no longer demanding attention. We're still here, it said. He nodded. Then tomorrow we start again. Not a dialogue, but a pact. Come morning, he'd stretch, check a small project, learn something new about himself. Starting again wasn't romantic, it was labor, but that's why it lasted. Asked, what's your tragedy? He could say tragedy was learning loss publicly, hearing applause fade and accepting silence, feeling his body refuse his heart's wants, being scrutinized to the soul's seams. But he could add, without those, how would I know what starting again means? At 62, tragedy was perseverance's advanced course. It made you present, kind, specific. No magic existed beyond 3 verbs: do, repeat, listen. As night settled, Michael jotted in a small notebook. An old habit kept: 1. Call scholarship girl. 2. Check third clinic's progress. 3. Meet racing team on safety protocols. 4. Dinner at home. 5. Give thanks. Then he closed it, turned off the light. No cheers, no cameras, no fireworks. just a man readying for a new day. History wrote him in soaring leaps. This chapter he wrote in quiet bows. If youth told America, be like Mike, maturity told kitchen kids, garage drivers, clinic patients, scholarship students, and himself, be your best. No need to be Michael Jordan, just start each morning from where you stand, steady, gentle, long enough. There, tragedy wasn't an end, it was a comma to the next sentence, and the teller of that sentence was still him, with a storm-weathered, soft but clear voice. We keep going. A Michael Jordan both tear-stained and proud. The Wilmington boy forged by solitude. The son bearing an unhealed wound from the summer of 1993 when his father was taken. The man who signed the "I'm back" facts like stitching a heart. The warrior who made the 72-10 season a manifesto of discipline. The survivor dragging a weary body through the 38-point flu game. The icon who dropped a step back in Game 6 of 1998 to close a dynasty, then accepted its dissolution. Grief followed as he returned to the Wizards, playing all 82 games at 40 to teach the young endurance, as his 2009 Hall of Fame speech bared the invisible cut of obsession, as he wept farewelling his brother Kobe, showing America men can cry. But from sorrow, the story shifts to celebration. Novant Health Family Clinics in North Carolina, a $100 million pledge for social justice, a record Make-A-Wish donation at 60, a 23 Racing opening paths for new talent, the painful choice to sell Hornets control to step back so the organization could advance, and a home with Yvette twin daughters, morning Pilates, on-time dinners. Be there, Mike replacing Be Like Mike. The lesson for Americans isn't an invincible myth, but a deeply American ethos. Turn tragedy into duty, glory into community service, and start again daily in small acts, calling a scholarship recipient, visiting a clinic, teaching a child to breathe through pressure. While the nation debates the greatest, the answer may be simple: one who holds dignity in tragedy, builds ecosystems for others to shine, and dares shift the slogan from "Be Like Mike" to "Be Your Best." Their pain doesn't end America's story. It opens a new day to be better together. If Michael's journey of starting again each day resonates with you, subscribe to our channel to join us in telling stories that turn pain into strength for the community. Thank you for being here. See you in the next video, where we keep pursuing Be Your Best in our own way.